Items 5 through 23, and then the walk-on, so-called walk-on from Senator Blakesley. Mr. Vice Chairman, you have any issues with any of those items?
No, we're okay with the walk-on.
Okay, so I would take a motion on the items that I just announced. Moved by Senator Ahlquist. Please call the roll.
Senators Ahlquist? Ahlquist, aye. DeLeon? Fuller?
Aye.
Fuller, aye. Dutton?
Aye.
Dutton, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
We'll leave the roll open for Senator DeLeon. For this next item, we are going to need him. It's file item 4. The governor appointee for vote only. If you remember, 2 weeks ago we heard Herbert L. Carter, DPA, as a trustee of the California State University. He's now up for vote only. Senator Ahlquist moves, and will please call the roll on Herb Carter. The chair recommends an aye vote.
Senators Ahlquist?
Aye.
Ahlquist, aye. DeLeon?
Aye.
DeLeon, aye. Fuller?
No.
Fuller, no. Dutton? Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
That's reported out 3-1 with one abstention to the Senate floor. Senator DeLeon, I'm going to add you on, or allow you. We'll open the roll on the items other than the governor's appointees appearing today. We had a unanimous vote on items 1, 3, 5 through 23, and the add-on from Senator Blakesley. We want to give you an opportunity to add on.
Senator DeLeon?
Aye.
DeLeon, aye.
Okay, those items are out 5-0. Now we have dispensed with all the business, but the governor's appointees appearing today. We will begin with J. Matthew Rodriguez, who is up for confirmation as the Secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Rodriguez. Welcome to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We have a tradition in the Rules Committee where we want to allow any nominee to introduce any family member or other special guest to make a brief opening statement, and then we will proceed to ask you a number of questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Senator. I do have a couple of folks to introduce today. I'm pleased that my wife is here today with me, Susan Rodriguez. We met 39 years ago at community college, and she has stood faithfully by my side through thick and thin, through court proceedings and now this kind of proceeding over the last 39 years.
This is better than court, by the way.
I'm hoping so, yes. And I can't express enough how much I appreciate her support through the years. And additionally, I will note, I think I owe her a Valentine's Day celebration since I was a bit distracted yesterday. She is not working today where she usually works with Children's Services in the county library in Alameda County. But she has a great rapport with the kids and does a great job. Additionally, our oldest son, Ian, is here today. He is a teacher in high school. He teaches history. And I can't, again, express how proud I am of him and the work that he does. I love to hear his stories about how he communicates with children and the rapport between him and the kids in the community. You see it when you see him out on the street. I see it in the stories. I'm very proud of what he does. And then my youngest son is here, or I should say our youngest son is here, Sean. I have to be mindful of that since my wife is here. Our youngest son is here. And I'm appreciative of that mostly because he's still speaking to me after I recommended to him that he bypass a scholarship to go to law school at UCLA in favor of going to law school at Bolt, where he now is in his third year and will be graduating soon, owing tens of thousands of dollars, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. I need a job to help him out.
Very good.
I'll also say that he's working right now. He's a certified attorney and working with the East Bay Community Law Center, where he helps disadvantaged individuals. And I'm just tremendously proud of the work that he does. And it's been a real pleasure to welcome him to the legal fraternity. So I appreciate your indulgence while I
Of course, very important.
introduce my family.
It says something about who you are, too, so go ahead.
Well, thank you. Again, I thank you for having me here today. I'm very honored to be here. Equally honored to have been appointed by Governor Brown as Secretary for Environmental Protection. And I know that the question that you have before you today is whether or not to support my appointment. In order for you to make that kind of determination, I think it's important that you know a little bit about who I am and how I got here. Indeed, to be honest, that's a question I've been asking myself for the last couple of weeks. And what I've come up with is this. I'm a lifelong Californian. I was born in Oakland. I was raised in the Bay Area. But I'll admit that my appreciation of the environment and the state's resources and its natural riches didn't really start with me until later in life. Growing up, my father taught me the value of hard work. He owned a small business, and he had little interest in the pursuit of outdoor activities, to tell you the truth. Similarly, my mother was not somebody that I would necessarily call an outdoors person. She liked to read. She liked conversation. She really liked politics and political conversations. I have a fond memory of being called in when I was in the 4th grade because I had to see a particularly important speech during the Republican convention. She thought that was interesting to see. It was an interesting background. And what came from my mother is that as a child of the Depression, she and her family had seen difficult times. And she had also seen the benefits and appreciated the benefits of enlightened government policies and decisions that could bring changes to the lives of everyday working men and women. And I think that that's what drove her to serve for 14 years on the Hayward City Council. And I think it's in large part responsible for the careers of her children. It's not happenstance that my sister works as with the Hayward public school system, and that, among other things, my brother is a municipal attorney working as a city attorney for the cities of Gonzales and Soledad. And it's this belief in the value of public service that ultimately brought me to law school as well. I was there because I wanted to make a difference, because I wanted to do something for the community, because I wanted to do something for the state. And it was in law school that I developed my interest in the environment and the state's natural resources. I took classes in land use and environmental law and constitutional law. And I came to the conclusion that there would be no greater job than to work to advance the public's right to clean air, pure water, to preserving the state's natural wonders, its beaches, its forests, its rivers, and also to promoting a healthy living and working environment for all Californians. And this is still what guides me today. This is my belief that we need a government that will do its best to be responsive to the needs of all the public. And so I count myself very fortunate to be here after 33 years in public service. In particular, for the last 24 years, it's been my distinct pleasure and honor to work as an attorney in the California Department of Justice, working in the Attorney General's office. Not only, I say hopefully, gave me some insight into working with our current governor, but it also gave me an opportunity to work with a highly dedicated group of attorneys who often gave up opportunities for greater wealth in the private sector because they were committed to a lifetime of work on behalf of the public and in the public interest. And through the years, I was very fortunate to be given increasing responsibility, which allowed me to work on a variety of cases involving all facets of government law, including environmental, land use, natural resource, consumer, and civil rights laws. From this experience, I've distilled a number of principles that will guide my actions as the Secretary for Cal EPA. First, this may seem odd coming from an attorney, but from experience I know that it's always more prudent and expeditious to see if you can reach an agreement, to find common ground and to come to a compromise rather than to step into a courtroom and use resources in litigation. This requires that we should always seek the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all stakeholders and communities in our decisions and our rulemaking activities. By extension, we need to be practical, and we should always seek to ensure that environmental protection and economic progress are not viewed as competing goals, but as complementary objectives. The decisions made by Cal EPA and its boards, departments, and offices have an impact on the lives of everyday Californians, and we need to have an understanding of the real-life implications of those actions that we take. Additionally, confusion and distrust of government actions are always obstacles to consensus and progress, and thus we should always strive to ensure that our regulatory decision-making and our decision-making processes are transparent, credible, and comprehensible, and that our laws and our requirements are clear and consistently applied. This requires that our decisions and regulations must be internally consistent, based on rigorous study, and based on the best available science. Finally, let me add that being an attorney, as we implement the laws, I want to assure you that I will always be mindful of what the law actually provides. That is, I care the way a statute is drafted. I want to know what the legislature intended when it drafted that legislation. And I want to know and work carefully to see how various laws can be harmonized so that we are always looking at the full picture and understanding the context in which laws have been adopted. I'll tell you that given my experience in the AG's office and government, there's nothing more frustrating when there are conflicting policies or when agencies are taking different positions on a matter. And so I'm dedicated to trying to bring agencies together, both within Cal EPA, but within all of state government, to make sure that our policies and our programs are working collaboratively and are harmonized with one another. Our state's environmental protection laws have gone a long way to ensuring that we can enjoy clean air, clean water, clean soil, and healthier living environment for all Californians. But much more needs to be done, and I'm confident that we can do more if we act in accordance with some of the principles that I've outlined here today. None of this ignores the fact that there are significant challenges ahead for all of us. We must be innovative, efficient, and aggressive in our efforts to build sustainable communities and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and respond to the effects of climate change. We must make sure that the chemicals we use in our industries, manufacturing, agriculture, and everyday lives do not introduce new unwarranted risks to our water, air, soil, and perhaps most importantly, our public health. And we must find the resources to clean up the toxic sites that previous activities have left behind. Additionally, we must work to improve the quality and assure the availability of our limited water resources for all Californians. And for purposes of this discussion, when I talk about all Californians, I mean not only the people, but I mean the natural resources, the fish, the wildlife, and the plants that are here as well. And finally, we need to do more to identify and focus our efforts on those communities in need. Those that are at the most disadvantage and at the most risk. They require special attention to assure that all Californians have an opportunity to find jobs and live their lives in a healthy environment. They must have the same quality of life and access to recreation and outdoor opportunities as other Californians. You'll notice that I mentioned that jobs are an important component of our effort to assist disadvantaged communities. It is not in anyone's interest to enforce laws in a way that will force business out of communities. Rather, we must apply the law in a way that will enhance both the economic and environmental conditions of our country and our state. We and our economy all depend on the continued health and vitality of California's environment. It is incumbent on us to be good stewards for the generations ahead. The position of Secretary of Cal EPA comes with great responsibility, and I want to assure you that I take this responsibility very seriously. I will lead the agencies that I oversee towards decisions that are responsive to the needs of the public and the people of California. So I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Why don't we begin with Senator Ahlquist? We'll go around the dais here. I know I have a series of questions, but We like to mix it up a little bit, you know?
That's good.
Well,
Go ahead.
thank you. We had a nice discussion just yesterday. Do have some questions. And as I mentioned yesterday, there are some important issues that I think it would be very good to have in the public record. I'll start with Kettleman City, which is a small income, low income, mainly Spanish-speaking community in Kings County, and home to a very large hazardous waste facility. There have been 11 birth defects between the years 2007 and 2010, which is unusual for a size with that small of a population. DPH, in conjunction with Cal EPA, issued a report in December of 2010 calling no singular causation or common cause for the birth defects. Last summer, a baby was born with terrible defects, birth defects, and died. So I just have two questions. Three questions. Number one, what work remains to be done investigating environmental factors that may explain the cause of these birth defects and deaths and to improve the overall public health in Kettleman City? And I think I'll tack the second question onto that and say, I want to see your passion. As a mathematician, I appreciate your conceptual view of the position, the overall, what needs to be done, et cetera. But I don't much hear the phrase protecting the public health. And I think this is a good place to put that in. I did notice on the third to the last page you did mention it one time, and I was happy for that. But I want to see and hear that more. So if you could explain what needs to be done and about your passion for this work.
Several things come to mind in responding to that question. First, I have looked at the record on Kettleman and the report that was done by DPH, or the Department of Public Health, and Cal EPA. We've discussed that with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments as well. And as I said, it's a very, very difficult situation because while we know that there are certain chemicals in the area, there's a hazardous waste dump, it's very difficult to find any sort of commonality in any of the defects that were there. And it's not been possible to draw a conclusion that there's one thing that they can look at as a problem. Interestingly enough, this is not an area that has an extraordinary number of cancers, for example. So it's difficult to really say exactly what the problem is, or if there is a problem and whether we're just dealing with an aberration. But we are continuing to look at that. We are in contact with the Department of Public Health to get an update. We are aware of the fact that there was an additional death last fall of a child that was recently born there. And we're going to continue to look at that area and get information so that we are aware of all the risks that are posed and so that we can address those risks. Now, we do have another request coming forward to the Department of Toxic Substances Control to expand the hazardous waste facility there. We're doing an addendum to look at the environmental issues to make sure that they are accurately considered. The Assistant Secretary for Environmental Justice has been down to Kettleman City twice to talk to the community down there, to talk to them to make sure that they are prepared to be involved in the process that will be starting soon and looking at expanding that facility. And we want to make sure that we work carefully with them to ensure that we're getting the correct information so that we can do an assessment.
So how does your passion for public health show itself?
Well, it shows itself because I'm very invested. I want to know. I can tell you this, that I've had meetings with stakeholders, and I find it extraordinarily difficult to deal with the question of if you, or the statement that if you don't do something, people's lives will be at risk and children will die. I find it very hard to go home at night and not be mindful of the weight of the decisions that I have to make. And so the way I respond to that is by getting personally involved, taking a look at the issues. Frankly, to be honest, on Fridays, I often work down in the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments. I've met the pediatrician who has, at great personal expense, decided to work with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments to help us to set standards for protecting children's health, and I expect that I will continue to have a dialogue with those folks.
And great. And my last question, as a former chair of the Senate Health Committee, I noticed in your material that I don't believe you really talked about working with Health and Human Services Agency, and how do you envision that moving forward? And that's my last question.
I envision moving that forward. I will make any calls and have any meetings that are necessary in order to get information out of that office. It's important to me. I think I indicated in the letter that I tend to have a very hands-on approach. If I become aware of an issue, my model in all of this is the governor. I pick up the phone and I call people and try to get answers. And that will be my approach in dealing with those issues. Thank you.
Very good. Senator Fuller?
Well, we had a great conversation in my office, and I appreciated the fact that one of your overall goals is, if I'm stating it correctly, is to diminish overlapping areas of responsibility among departments, provide clarity with regulations that sometimes have conflicting viewpoints within departments. And certainly, given this time of lean resources, we really, really need to have a process that does that. So I thank you for that. Since then, I've received a few more questions. I'd like to ask them on behalf of specific areas of sort of departmental jurisdiction. And the first is that there are many environmental initiatives that are pushing the envelope, including green chemistry, cap and trade, renewable portfolio standard, low carbon fuel standard, which is one that really worries me, stormwater regulations, et cetera. And sort of as we talked about, establishing the overall umbrella. This is an overall umbrella question. How do you plan to manage the implementation to minimize the cumulative economic impact of these initiatives on business?
Well, as I said, it's important to reach out to stakeholders and understand from the stakeholders the implications of these programs as they're rolled out. I've made the effort to be responsive to any stakeholder group that wants to come by and talk to me, because as we discussed the other day, when I'm looking at agriculture, for example, I am loath to make any decisions concerning pesticide use or the use of fumigants until I understand more about the agricultural economy. So in partial answer to what you're asking, I'm looking for all the information that can be provided to me by the folks who are impacted by these regulations. Additionally, we regularly sit down. I have a nice marble table in my office, and I regularly call the members of the boards and departments and offices within Cal EPA to my office to sit down and talk about their programs. How are they going to work? What have they cleared what they're about to do with other agencies or departments in the state. So, for example, I've had discussions with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment concerning some of their relevant exposure levels for various materials, and I've wanted them to talk to Cal Recycle and make sure that what they're doing is not getting in the way of what Cal Recycle is proposing by way of recycling programs. So it's just a matter of sitting down with the boards and departments, talking to them about how their programs work, both at a practical level and just as a process, and trying to avoid any duplication and trying to make sure our decisions are based on science and real-world considerations and factors.
Great. And one of the specific questions was, what do you believe is going to be the economic impact of the green chemistry regulations and/or the benefits?
you know, since the regulations haven't been adopted yet, and I see it as an iterative process where I know that Director Rafael is going to continue to talk to stakeholders and continue to work on fine-tuning these regulations. So it's a little bit difficult to say exactly how the regulations are going to affect businesses here. I will say that we're going to be very cautious in the application of the regulations. When Director Rafael has talked about them in the past, she's talked about doing a handful, 2 to 5 products perhaps in the future, just to see how the process works, to understand how the process works, to make sure that we're adequately considering the interests of all stakeholders, be they non-governmental organizations or businesses. And that will help us to assess the exact economic impact. My sense is that it will also depend on, you know, the chemicals in many cases. What kind of products are we looking at? I know that my experience in working with some of the Prop 65 cases when I was a supervisor in the Attorney General's office, it was not unusual for a matter to come up, and sometimes business was able to make adjustments and deal with things relatively quickly. And so it's just, and so I wouldn't want to rule out that could happen in these situations where we sit down and work. The goal, as the legislature has directed us, is to adopt a program that will identify some of these chemicals of concern and see what we can do to get them out of our everyday living environment. That's our intent. But we don't want to drive any businesses out of California. We want to make sure that we're being practical. We want to make sure that the program that gets rolled out is really going to work. And we're going to work on that on the next couple of months as we go through the process and actually adopt this particular set of regulations.
Great. I have 2 more, and in the interest of everybody else, we'll try to accept a brief answer. We can go over them more later. But one of the concerns is that as originally designed, the CARB's cap and trade program would have included a soft start, including free admission allowances in order to allow regulated industries to adequately prepare to meet the declining emissions cap over time. But recently, CARB has amended the program to withhold 10% of those allowances and instead auction them. That seems to cause a lot of concern from the energy providers, the universities, and others, that it would be very expensive, and these costs will ultimately have to be borne by the consumers. Would you support this path, or would you encourage a return to the free allowance approach, or is there some other approach that you envision that you might implement, especially in view of the fact that the emissions reductions can be apparently achieved without the auction?
Well, I'm always open to discussion with stakeholders. My understanding from the conversations with the Air Resources Board staff is that there have been a number of discussions, and that there are segments of the industry that have some concerns, and I know that they've talked to the universities in particular. But the sense is that we can go ahead with the program and make it work as currently designed. But if there are I'm trying to think. I know that I've talked to the universities about this, and if there are additional concerns that we need to be made aware of, no auction is planned until August. We've got some time to have additional discussions, and so I'm always open to discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And most of us, for their questions, were similar. How would the new regulations affect cost? And it sounds to me that you're very, very open to continuing ongoing stakeholder discussions in those areas, especially if there's any new information that needs to come to light.
Absolutely. I want to make sure that we've got the best information behind our decisions that we can have, and so that requires continuing discussion. And I apologize if my answers go too long sometimes. I tend to be long-winded. So.
We thank you very much, and I thank you for your past answers. Thank you.
We always say, the term lawyer filing a brief is always an oxymoron. The old joke.
Yeah.
Senator Dutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good day again, and also I enjoyed our lengthy conversation yesterday. I would like to get a clarification on a couple of things that I think we actually talked about yesterday, and maybe even kind of further some of the thoughts that Senator Fuller had, just a little bit further clarification. There was a question about green chemistry and business interests and so forth. I'd just like to know that, can you commit today that you're going to work with all stakeholders, and that includes business big and small, with regards to these draft regulations, and try to work to ensure that the economic impact analysis is done, and that kind of like, people may not like it, but at least everybody feels like they've been part of the process.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm an attorney that likes to try to avoid conflict if I can. And one of the ways that you can avoid unnecessary conflicts is by having an open dialogue. I used to find that it was easier to settle cases if you had an open dialogue. So I know in talking to Director Rafael that she is interested in receiving input from all segments of the business community. They're the ones who are most likely to be impacted by these regulations, and so I'll talk to anybody who wants to come by my office. I'll go to them if I need to.
So the answer is yes. You are committing that you're going to involve.
I'm trying to help I apologize. The answer, Senator, is yes.
Okay.
I'm shocked. You've answered the question. You've said that you will work with everybody. That is right. That is
clarification here.
Good. Very good, Senator.
One of the problems or one of the challenges that we've had is been regarding the Department of Toxic and Substance Control. It's not so much what they're trying, their objective it's their methodology about how we are going to how they're going about it. Sometimes there's been some concerns about hasn't been so much their viewpoints haven't necessarily been based on scientific fact as it is just based on opinion or so forth. And so there's been some great concern about this concept of green chemistry and its potential economic impact versus the benefit that it may have, or if it's even actually going to do us any good, particularly with small and medium businesses who really can't absorb the cost. So what I'm concerned about is that in your responses, you say that the Department of Toxic and Substance Control have demonstrated a willingness to solicit and consider various viewpoints, but I'm not hearing that. And so what can you do in your capacity to kind of help make sure that the small, particularly the small businesses, do feel like their concerns are being addressed?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think it's important, and let me say that I do appreciate Director Rafael's energy and commitment to working with all stakeholder groups. And so one of the things that I think I can commit to you is we'll talk to businesses, and we're aware of the fact that sometimes you need to reach out a little bit more to understand the implications for small business. Larger businesses are capable oftentimes of representing themselves. We need to make sure that we understand how small businesses are affected. And so, again, if there are small businesses that want to come by and make sure that their voices are being heard, my door is always open. And I know that Director Rafael's door will also be open as well. One of the things that we can't be sure of, frankly, is the extent to which small businesses will be affected by the green chemistry regs. We're only going to be doing a handful of chemicals a year or products a year, and we're going to be looking at a variety of factors and making a determination on which chemicals and products to look at. And one of them will be, how many of these products are out there? How widely are they used? How many people are coming into contact with them? So I think that I can't tell you that small businesses won't be affected by this, but I think we need to see how this is going to play out. And I'm not thinking that there will be a lot of small businesses, at least initially, that could be affected. I may be wrong, but it's my sense, and that's one of the things we can discuss with small businesses. How is this going to work? But I do want to emphasize that this is something that's going to take a while, and one of the things we'll be looking at is focusing only on those products that really are widely distributed, that pose the most risk, we think, to the California public.
Well, just keep one thing in mind. I think a lot of us believe in the legislature, at least a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, believe that part of the recovery of California, a major part of it's going to be the viability of the small business community. And just let me tell you that I probably do as much outreach to the small chambers of commerce throughout my entire district. It's basically a blue-collar type of population there, and a lot of small business owners, and they get lost. They don't really feel, except for contacting my office, that they're really, and this isn't just this administration, it's the prior administration as well, that they just don't feel like anybody up here really cares about them. And they feel like they're out there all alone. So anything you can do to actually help with outreach, not just wait for them to approach you, but maybe come up with something that you can go talk to the smaller chambers of commerce through the state and make sure that they know that door is open. That might go a little ways towards trying to help the small business community feel like they're part of the solution and not just being sacrificed.
I think that's excellent advice. Go ahead.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, back you up. That's right. I mean, they shouldn't just department shouldn't just be reactive. The agency should be out there, showing the good face of government here, and that we want to, as you say, work out problems before get out of hand. Go ahead, Senator Dutton.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about cap and trade. Can you provide us with your understanding of the term risk of leakage under cap and trade?
My understanding, what we don't want to see is businesses leaving California because of our cap and trade system. And so that's one of the things, or, diverting business and work outside the state of California. That we know that was one of the problems that occurred, or we know that's one of the issues, I should say, that's affected the regional greenhouse gas initiative back in the Northeast. And so it's one of the things that we've always looked at. The bottom line on all of that is we don't want to drive any businesses out of California.
Well, keep in mind, too, as a small business owner, you have to kind of believe in the KISS principle, and that's keep it simple. All right? It's a little cumbersome, a little tough. But what kind of policy tools do you feel that CARB should be using to minimize this risk of leakage?
Well, that's where we need to have as much information as we can about, initially we'll be dealing mostly with energy producers and certain manufacturers, and we'll just need to have information on their continued operations so that we will know, where energy is coming from, who they're relying on, what their contacts are out of state, and that will allow us to assess whether we're having leakage problems and whether, business is moving out of the state. It's so important to have appropriate information to make this system work at all levels.
Okay. And what are your plans as the Cal EPA Secretary to ensure that CARB, California Air Resources Board, pays adequate attention to protecting California jobs with regards to the AB 32 program?
We have traditionally had weekly meetings with the staff and with Chair Nichols to discuss actually all the activities of CARB, but we have focused particularly on cap and trade, and I intend to continue to have those kinds of meetings with them. I need to know why they're doing what they're doing. I am the secretary. They are part of Cal EPA, and I need to make sure that I understand what they're doing, so I can give them some direction if I think they're doing something that's inconsistent with the will of the administration.
Would you would you believe that we should err on the side of protecting jobs?
Risk assessment is always so difficult, Senator. It's how many jobs are you looking at? What sort of harm are you trying to offset? I will say this, that no program that undermines the California economy is going to have a long shelf life. So if we find that we are driving jobs out of California, we're going to have to reassess what we're doing with the program. That being said, a lot of work has been done, a lot of study has been done to try and make sure that we know what the impacts are going to be. We've seen actually some positive economic effects in some of the northeastern states that have this kind of program, and we're hopeful, and our expectation is that we'll have a similar benefit here.
Well, what I'm concerned about is that we have companies out there that are being asked to pay extra dollars, billions of dollars at times, and sometimes it's a little tough to understand what the nexus is between the dollars that they're paying in the CARB and what it's actually being used for, and is there some kind of real benefit there, or is this just going to become a slush fund for CARB to kind of just do what it wants to do with it? So,
Senator, I can assure you that it won't be a slush fund. Everybody's going to be watching what happens with any money that's produced from this program.
Okay. Do you know what the status is? It was my understanding. Of course, I never quite understood how Governor Schwarzenegger could have went into agreements with other countries. I didn't realize that California had that ability. But what is the status of these agreements that Governor Schwarzenegger apparently entered into with regards to AB 32 and so forth?
There are a number of fronts upon which some of this outreach to other government entities, shall we say, is progressing. There's a meeting of the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which is involves Alaska. Now, Alaska's dropped out, but it is Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia that meeting will go on, and that's just a discussion of whether we all share common objectives and can work on common objectives in various areas. And then additionally with cap and trade, there is a very, very active effort to link California's cap and trade program with cap and trade programs in provinces in Canada. Right now, the only one that is really actively being discussed is perhaps linkage with the province of Quebec. We know that British Columbia is looking at cap and trade programs sometime in the future, perhaps, and also there are discussions with Manitoba, and I know that Ontario is watching what we're doing as well. There were more states, frankly, involved at one time, but right now most of the activities are with the provinces in Canada. Those discussions take place in two levels. One is the Western Climate Initiative, which is just a loose collaboration of these groups. And then there is a Western Climate Initiative Incorporated, which is a nonprofit, which is really the mechanism by which Quebec and other provinces, and potentially at some point other states, could interact and share the costs of doing monitoring and enforcement of cap and trade programs. All of that's in progress right now, and we'll see where we are as the months unfold.
Well, I take it these aren't like treaties, because obviously California doesn't have the legal authority to enter into a treaty with another country. So how do these become binding? I don't...
Well, we're careful in our discussions never to bind California in any way. California has to have the freedom to implement and work out its own environmental programs and policies. What these are really just agreements to collaborate and in certain instances share costs And we are very, very confident. I've seen some discussion on this that we're very confident that that doesn't get in the way of the contract's cause. We're not entering into treaties with foreign countries that are trying to expand the rights of the state at the expense of the federal government. So a lot of studies gone into this, and we don't think that there's a compacts clause problem.
You said a sharing of cost. Is that was that done through what process? Is it going to be an action on the part of the budget process that we allocate a certain amount of dollars, or is this for that, I don't want to say slush fund, but that little fund that I was talking about earlier with
cap and trade?
Cap and trade.
There are AB 32 fees, as I understand it, that are already available to implement the program, and those are the funds that would be used.
And that wouldn't be with any kind of legislative authority at all. They can just do that as a function of everyday business.
No, well, you talk about the appropriation of the money?
I'm talking about, he said there's agreements with Quebec and everything of sharing a cost. I'm curious where the money's going to come from California to share those costs. And it sounds like it's coming from CARB through the fees that they're collecting. But the expenditure of those dollars, is that with or without legislative authority? That's what I was looking at.
I see.
My understanding, Senator, is that this is already within the authorization of the agency.
Without any oversight from
No,
us
it's already been approved by the legislature.
Well, let me ask you another question. I understand there's a not-for-profit C4 that's being used to administer AB 32 administrative fees. And I understand that particular nonprofit it's actually a Delaware corporation as opposed to a California corporation. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do. It has been set up, as I said, that's one of the mechanisms by which you can work with the province of Quebec. It's modeled after the same sort of nonprofit that was established to run the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program by the states in the Northeast. And it's not unusual, frankly, for nonprofits to use Delaware law because Delaware has firmly established corporate laws. Many corporations use Delaware laws. For example, many corporations that we traditionally think of as California corporations, such as Hewlett-Packard or Wells Fargo, Disney, are all Delaware corporations. So the fact of incorporation in Delaware doesn't have any great significance in and of itself, and it doesn't dictate, where you're operating from. Yeah, I mean, as I said, those are all California corporations. It's simply because the Delaware law is recognized in the corporate world as a set of laws that folks are work with generally, and frankly, it's easier to mix with other states, for example, if cap and trade, as we believe it will be, becomes a model for how you deal with greenhouse gas emissions, then other states may become interested in this, and it would be easier to get them to join if we, with a corporation in Delaware that they're familiar with.
I just found it kind of ironic that California, in essence, wants to form a corporation for the purpose of AB 32, but they want to incorporate under another state's laws as opposed to California. I just find that kind of humorous, and it might also kind of lead to the question. I guess even for CARB, I guess California is a tough state to have to organize and do business in.
It really isn't. It really isn't a cost issue, Senator. I assure you, it is just a question of we're just trying to do what the corporations do. Private businesses and NGOs do this, and it seems to be a good model for us to follow.
Okay, so we do have administrative fees from under the AB 32 through CARB being funneled through a Delaware corporation for the purposes of furthering the global warming agenda.
I'm not too sure that I would use the word funnel, but we are working with that corporation so that we can work collaboratively with these other provinces.
Well, we collect it here, and then somehow it's paid over to this other corporation which then uses it for another purpose. I don't know what your choice of words are. It sounds like we're kind of directing it that way, I guess.
We still maintain control over those funds through this organization.
But the legislature has no oversight regarding those funds.
The legislature always has ultimate oversight over the legislation that established AB 32.
I know, but we didn't approve the transfer of those fees to the Delaware Corporation.
As I mentioned, my understanding is that CARB has looked at this and feels that those expenditures are consistent with authorization that they've received before.
They didn't come back for clarification, though. You understand that CARB just decided that that was an appropriate allowable use under the AB 32 rules.
Actually, I do believe that, that this question has been asked, and CARB is sending a response on that, and so that response will I think, be directly address that issue.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to have a couple follow-up questions on that same topic when I get to my questioning. Senator DeLeon?
Thank you very much, Mr. Pro Tem. I very much enjoyed our meeting that we had the other day. Mr. Rodriguez, I learned a lot about you both professionally as well as personally. I'll make a quick side note comment. I do believe that we can have clean air and clean water and a strong, robust economy, that they're not mutually exclusive here in the state of California. Interestingly enough, I would say that I think both Senator Dutton and I may have similar views, if you will, on cap and trade, although maybe for various different reasons, nonetheless. But Mr. Rodriguez, I want to go to AB 32, since that's sort of the topic at hand right now, in a section that you're familiar with, section that we both discussed the other day, section 38565. So Section 38565 in AB 32, give me your interpretation of that section.
That section really directs the ARB in developing the cap and trade program to be conscious of and be supportive of disadvantaged communities that the legislature has determined have been placed at a disadvantage by some of the practices in the past that are involved with the production of greenhouse gas emissions. And so, as I suggested the other day, we're very well aware of the fact that a portion of AB 32 requires us to be conscious of the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the reduction program on areas that are disadvantaged.
What does conscious mean specifically?
We need to take it into consideration when we're making our decisions, and that's more than just a box on a checklist. We're going to have to, I know, produce some concrete results that show that we are doing something to help disadvantaged communities as part of the AB 32 program.
What I had brought up, and I wasn't trying to make light of it, but it is interesting and somewhat ironic that Senator Dutton and perhaps other individuals on the Republican side, as well as myself, have similar views on cap and trade, albeit for different reasons. Obviously, the conversation that we both ensued in, which was a very good conversation, is that I think there's ample evidence, conclusive evidence, and empirical data that clearly suggests that certain communities up and down the state of California will be disproportionately impacted by both climate change and obviously by traditional pollutants, whether it's NOx, whether it's SOx, whether it's different types of particulate matter that come from the same emitter, if you will. Go into little detail as much as you can with regards to the type of investments we should have with those specific communities that will be disproportionately impacted by climate change, now that we have established a market-based mechanism and what we're going to do with our auctions.
Certainly, Senator. And if you don't mind, let me broaden it a little bit. Let me tell you how I see environmental justice and how we should be dealing with environmental justice in disadvantaged communities. Because AB 32, which will deal with greenhouse gas emissions and reductions in those emissions and with communities that are already affected by those areas, is part of this overall approach to environmental justice. Frankly, I see it as a four-tiered approach. and I'm working on this, so I hope you'll bear with me. It's, one, part of AB 32 and part of what CARB is doing is provide information. Let's get as much information about these areas as we can, and that's going to be part of their adaptive management program that they've adopted in conjunction with AB 32. Let's continue to get information. And I think that one of the things that I want to work on, in not just in AB 32, but just generally, is to continue to get information so that we can identify disadvantaged areas in the state. Why do we need that information? So that we can then focus programs of various kinds in those areas. Those would be grant programs. So, for example, Cal EPA has a small grant program that we can target to environmental justice communities that can help out those communities. We will also be looking at whether there are other programs that we can use to direct cap-and-trade funds to help areas that are disadvantaged. So that's one of the other things that we can look at. So it's a question of finding those areas, identifying those areas, and then funneling grant funds to them when those funds are available, or supporting programs in those developments in those areas that are addressing the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions or dealing with reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. That's part of the overall approach that I'm thinking of in terms of environmental justice. And then I'll just throw in that one of the other things that we want to do with environmental justice is look at what we can do by way of mitigation when we're looking at specific projects in environmental justice areas. So by way of if new developments are going in to areas that are disadvantaged already. I don't want to do anything, and I'm looking at Senator Dutton now, that I don't want to do anything that will discourage development in these areas. But when you do, your CEQA analysis, you identify mitigation, let's try and make sure that the mitigation really helps and aids the community in which that project is going. I don't want to see mitigation that is applied on a regional basis so it doesn't help the specific disadvantaged communities. So we're going to be looking at how can we make that linkage up so that we can help those areas. Frankly, I've got a new environmental justice assistant, as we discussed the other day in the office, and I'm looking forward to talking to him. And certainly we can talk to you in the future as well, Senator, about how we're going to approach environmental justice issues. But that gives you an idea of some of the approaches that we're thinking of at this point. It really is a question of identifying those areas, getting as much information as we can about those areas so that we can then tailor our programs and policies to addressing the issues in those areas that we identify.
Mr. Rodriguez, the Secretary of the Cal EPA obviously is a very important position, and arguably it's the second most powerful position in the country when it comes to EPA. After Lisa Jackson, the federal EPA of the United States, obviously. So your actions in California obviously will have an impact throughout the country, and most likely will have an impact at the national level in Washington, D.C. More often than not, here in California, we push the envelope much, much further than they do in Washington, D.C. So therefore, the rest of the country looks westward for leadership as opposed to eastward to the nation's capital. So your position is very, very important, obviously. And it's a position that I don't take lightly at all whatsoever, even with a Democratic administration. In this case, Governor Brown so far has been very wise, if you will, and very prudent with regards to his selections of various cabinet positions so far. Now, on Section 38565, and we've had this discussion, and I have a lot of respect for your experience and working in the Attorney General's office and all the litigation that you have head up. The acumen that you possess, I have no doubt that you have a strong commitment to the various communities that we have in the state of California, particularly those who have been disproportionately impacted by whether it's climate change, whether it's pesticides, whether it's just bad water, whatever it is, I have a lot of respect. I'm trying to sort of reconcile, a floor threshold, if you will, with regards to what we do with regards to investments in these communities, as opposed to allowing for, as I said the other day, subjective artistry to take place, whether it's through your office or whether it's simply through CARP. You know, and what I'm looking for is minimum thresholds that guarantee, if you will, because when this comes to fruition, whether folks like it or not, whether it's folks on the right, whether it's folks on the left who agree or disagree with cap and trade, the probabilities are it's going to come to fruition, regardless of the lawsuits right now. So that being said, so I'm very clear, and I'm on the record so that you know, I'm looking for minimum ground thresholds. You know, not caps, but a ground floor threshold, if you will, a benchmark to work from the bottom up with regards to these types of investments. Because once the auctions hit, there'll be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars over the course of time with regards to, you know, a cap and trade. So I'm looking for minimum thresholds in terms of investments in these communities that, again, they're disproportionately impacted. Give me your views on this.
Well, as Senator, as I suggested the other day, I think I want to know more about how much money is coming in and what the priorities are in terms of what other programs are out there, which programs will provide us the greatest number of co-benefits, which is another part of AB 32. And so, you know, I have been unable to come to a position that says, oh, this is the threshold or this is the floor that we should have. But as I indicated, I'm more than willing to talk to you, and our expectation is that we will work with the legislature. We know we have to work with the legislature on how these funds are going to be expended. So I think that we will be able to come, I know we're going to have to come to an agreement with the legislature on how these funds can be expended.
We're going to have to come to agreement, whether it's the legislative policy or whether it's through a trailer bill language, obviously. And you are right, we are a co-equal branch of the executive, you know, branch, so there's no doubt about it. I'm glad that you recognize that very much so. We had a very good working relationship within Secretary of Cal EPA, Linda Adams, so obviously we have a lot of history and experience, and obviously, as you know, strong viewpoints on this issue, so we expect to have that type of relationship, a working relationship with you as well.
Absolutely, Senator. I understand your interest in this issue, and I appreciate your long involvement in this issue. And so, as I committed the other day, this is something that we will continue to discuss with you.
Okay, and just you know, one last comment is that, you know, I do have a what I believe is a major responsibility to protect those who have little or no voice. You know. Whether they're being choked by freeways or stationary emitters of CO2 and other traditional pollutants that exist right now. Because if they don't have a voice here, then they have no voice anywhere else. So I'm looking forward to a very close, proactive, and concrete working relationship with you, Mr. Rodriguez.
I look forward to that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. A couple follow-up questions from my colleagues. I think it's clear, but maybe for the record we ought to make it very clear. Do you hold the position and believe that any cap-and-trade revenues are subject to legislative appropriation, then obviously subject to final approval by the governor, or not?
We understand that we need to come to you to get agreement on how we're going to use that cap and trade, those cap and trade funds.
Is the proper term appropriation?
I will.
I think you're.
Oh, yes, it is.
Good.
There's a reason I went to law school and didn't become an accountant.
That's
so,
okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. It's important that the public knows that, because out in the public realm, these dollars, frankly, have been spent about 4 times over. If you look at all the, you know, all the proposals and what people are talking about, and the public needs to know, as far as process is concerned, that there's going to be a collaborative and public discussion about how to spend whatever resources are generated. Mm-hmm. So that's good clarity. I want to go back to Senator Dutton's questioning from a slightly different perspective, because we probably have some different views issues on this, but the question, it's not so much the Delaware issue that concerns me, but it's the fact that we have a nonprofit corporation, which you serve on the board of directors, that is going to be responsible for running this auction. And we ask this question in the Rules Committee all the time, so where does the buck stop? Who is ultimately responsible for the performance of the nonprofit if something goes wrong? If, and I don't think it will be, but if it is a failed market mechanism, and if it fails in part because the auction house, the nonprofit, does something that it shouldn't do, who's responsible? And who's overseeing the performance of the nonprofit, especially since you're now a member of the board of directors of the nonprofit?
Well, the first part of my answer will be that one of the reasons that I agreed to this after a great deal of soul searching and discussion with the attorneys within the state was so that we could keep an eye on what was going on at the nonprofit, because I want to make sure that we are actively involved in the operations of the nonprofit. And then assure you that we have been discussing this matter with both corporate counsel and, frankly, with the Attorney General's office to ensure that this is not going to be something that is going to collapse or cause problems for the state of California.
I believe you, but if it But if that isn't correct, and even if something were to go wrong, say in the next administration or beyond your tenure, what I want to know is, given the setup here, who do you consider to be responsible for the performance of the auction mechanism?
We will be exercising authority with the other partners in the corporation over this auction mechanism to make sure that it works. But the guarantee to the members of the corporation is that this will not work to their disadvantage. I can't tell you the specifics of how that will be done. I will tell you this, that within the next several months, I know that we're looking at how to ensure that we have adequate monitoring, how to make sure that we as a state have the ability to monitor and enforce and protect our interests within this company. I can tell you that I was with the Attorney General's office when we had the collapse of the energy market in early 2000, and I've suggested that we don't want to be in the position that we were in at that point, where we were scrambling to cobble together groups to deal with enforcement after the fact. So we're going to be working to make sure that we have a mechanism in place in the state of California, so that we're not just relying on the Western Climate Initiative, Inc., to make sure that we can enforce our requirements and the auction requirements.
Well, I can tell you, we all know who was held accountable when the energy markets collapsed in California. It was the governor. He was recalled. I may not be expressing my question as clearly as I should, and I'm actually not looking, well, I am looking for your reassurance, as you've begun to give it here, that this is going to be well monitored and that you're working on a plan for how to make sure that it runs right, and that ought to be the subject of legislative oversight hearings. But for purposes of this Rules Committee, you're the secretary of the EPA, and if something goes wrong, which I don't anticipate it will, but if something does, I think what the public wants to hear, and I think what I want to hear, is that you will be responsible for the performance of this entity that you've been responsible for creating. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
That's not asking too much.
I will tell you that I had that dialogue with the attorneys in the Attorney General's office before I agreed to this, I did not make the decision to join into this lightly. I looked at a number of factors. The significance of the cap-and-trade program, the large amount of work that had gone into it, the planning that had gone into it to this date, the experience we had with the regional greenhouse gas initiative. And after looking at all those things, I went into this agreeing to this and acknowledging that that made me responsible for this decision. So, yes, I take responsibility for our decision to go ahead here.
Very good. And the Air Resources Board, who is the more direct overseer, they are responsible as well for the performance of this contracted nonprofit, correct?
Oh, we all have a vested interest in making sure that this does not go south. Yes.
Are they accountable?
Yes.
And you're accountable?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
And that simply is, if the program's not working, what are you going to do?
We'll continue. As I said, no authority from the state of California is really transfer. We have our regulatory program. If we decide to withdraw from this and do this as our own program, that's within our power to do that.
I mean, really what I'm looking for is, if it's not working, I will let you know so we can do something about it, and I will let the public know so we can work collaboratively to do something about it. That's the kind of passion I'm looking for.
Senator, as I said initially, the plan is to be very transparent, to let everybody know what's going on, particularly in something like this. There are no secrets. Everybody will know how this program is progressing. As I said, we're very hopeful that it will be successful. Our expectation is it will be successful, and we will let you know how it's going.
And that a quick follow-up, and then I'm going to
just follow up to Ellen, her question. You said plan, but I think what I'd like to hear is that Governor Brown has given you the authority to let the legislature know what is going on, that we don't have to go try to drag it out of somebody. I've been here for now going on, this is my 8th year, and I can't tell you the frustration that I've had, as well as colleagues on both sides of the aisle, that I talk to somebody like you, and I'm inclined to support you because I think you're very honest, and I think you're giving me very straight answers and so forth. I have no doubt of your commitment to public service. I think you're really, really top notch. But I also know you've got certain restrictions, okay, on yourself, or that you place on yourself because of being a secretary in capacity. I just want to know that the governor has given you authority to be able to communicate directly to us. So if something is going create a problem or something's wrong, that we get the kind of reports that we need so we can react to it on a timely basis, and we don't have to go through a process of reading about it in the LA Times or something like that. I'd just like to know I at least have the ability to get the info so I can react.
I can assure you, you will get the info. There is no interest in withholding. In fact, I think this program will be much more successful if people understand exactly how it's working. And so my interest is in making sure that you folks get the information that you need, and so that you're assured that it's working too.
Thank you.
I have too many questions, but I'm going to limit it to just a couple.
Which I've probably led.
Otherwise, it'll be a real long day. I fundamentally believe in the potential of cap and trade, but anticipating the potential of lawsuits and challenges, and putting that side by side with the AB 32 mandate, is the administration developing any kind of a backup plan or contingency plan for the credits, the carbon emissions, the reduced carbon emissions that you intend to make up through cap and trade?
I know that ARB looked at a variety of approaches and decided that cap and trade was the most important approach. And so they've done a lot of work in this area, and they're committed to going ahead with cap and trade. I will let you know just personally, being on the scene for 6 months, that, and I was a history major just as my son was, I always believe in a defense in depth. And so I'd be interested in, let me put it this way, I intend to come up to speed on other options that would be available for us. I'm committed to cap and trade. I think, frankly, if cap and trade doesn't work here, other governments will not pursue cap and trade. But I'm committed to trying to make this work. That's my intent. But I want to know as much about the subject area as possible.
Very good. That's good answer, complete answer. Last question. One of the sort of spoken issues around AB 32 compliance, at least within your circles maybe, is SB 375, which is the land use portion of it. With the loss of the redevelopment dollars as a result of the Supreme Court decision of a month or so ago, what is the administration's strategy for gaining the resources to successfully implement SB 375 and therefore make AB 32 successful?
I can tell you that we're going to be looking just at the Cal EPA level at funding sources. We'll be looking at, for example, whether there cap and trade funds have to be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But to the extent that SB 375 shares that same goal.
Yes.
My expectation is that there may be some crossover between the two. That's a potential area that we can take a look at, and to fulfill the mandate of SB 375. And we intend to look at other funding sources that may be available. Having worked as an attorney advising redevelopment agencies before, I understand the role that they played in local governments. But we'll just be looking at other options at this point to see what we can do. In particular, we'll be looking at some of the funding that's available through cap and trade.
Okay. And I just might suggest that there's some new appointments, new personnel over at BT&H, which is responsible as well for SB 375. And I suggest you reach out to this guy, Brian Kelly, who I haven't heard of. but I'm told is a good guy, a fine guy, actually.
I've heard the same rumor.
All right.
Yeah.
But no, in all seriousness, your operation and that operation, I think, really need to work hand in glove in ensuring that the law is successfully implemented.
Mm-hmm. We will certainly do so, and that's the point of the Strategic Growth Council. So.
Good, very good. Witnesses in support of the nominee, please. We'll be relatively brief. We'd appreciate it. Go ahead.
Rick Tomlinson on behalf of hundreds of strawberry farmers in California. We appreciate Mr. Rodriguez's thoughtfulness and willing to hear from all stakeholders. We express support.
Very good.
Ann Nothoff with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and pleased to support confirmation today. I will just note that I knew Mr. Rodriguez when he and I were both very much younger in the first Jerry Brown administration. I know that's hard to believe, but and I've followed his career, and it's been one that's been particularly interested in hearing from all sides and incorporating lots of views. So I think that we'll all be very proud of the way he protects California's environment.
Very good. Thank you.
Senators Dan Cobb, representing Union Concerned Scientists. We believe Mr. Rodriguez is well qualified to oversee and manage the Cal EPA agency that is charged with protecting the environmental health of California residents. And we are particularly glad to hear of his commitment to basing the implementation of environmental laws on the best available science. We urge your confirmation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Pablo Garza with the Nature Conservancy. We're pleased to support Mr. Rodriguez's confirmation and look forward to working with him.
Thank you.
Chair members, Chris Mertens on behalf of Bloom Energy, also in strong support of Mr. Rodriguez's confirmation.
Cynthia Vitale here on behalf of the Ocean Conservancy. We're in support of Rodriguez's confirmation.
Senators Mark Fenstermaker on behalf of Sunrun, also in support of Mr. Rodriguez's confirmation.
Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. The nexus between the energy, transportation, and environment world is going to be complicated, and we very much endorse Matt Rodriguez as Secretary. Thank you.
Nydia Bautista with the Coalition for Clean Air, also support the Secretary and look forward to working with him. We have high expectations, though.
So do we.
Thank you. Eric Holstrom, Environmental Defense Fund here in Sacramento, and we enthusiastically support the confirmation of Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support of the nominee? Are there witnesses in opposition to the nominee? Anybody on the fence?
You may want to check with my wife.
That's actually not an approved category of testimony. I think that Senator Dutton, said it right there at the very end. You're obviously very, very accomplished, and I think the right person for the job. I think Governor Brown's to be commended for an excellent appointment. It's a very big job, and your policy portfolio is large. And I hope that the hearing today was, I know it's always nerve-wracking for the nominee, but part of the process is not just to assess the qualifications of the nominee. Your qualifications are obvious and you did well. But it's also to make it clear that the legislature is a co-equal branch, and and when it comes to a lot of these new initiatives, we want to make sure that they are being properly overseen, and that there is accountability, because ultimately we're accountable as representatives of the people, and so is the governor. And as we always say, this ought to be the beginning of the relationship, not the end, just because you will be confirmed enthusiastically, I believe. Let it be the beginning.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and you're listening to my long-winded answers. So.
Very, very good. Take a motion. Senator De Leon, please call the roll.
Senator Zalquist?
Aye.
Alquist, aye. De Leon? Aye. De Leon, aye. Fuller?
Aye.
Fuller, aye. Dutton?
Aye.
Dutton, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
It's 5-0. That'll go to the Senate floor. Congratulations. We will take a 10-minute break and come back with General Baldwin at 3:10. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.